Hey guys, it's Passion 9. Some crazy things have happened to me lately, and I'm going to try and make a very long story very short here by just telling you that I am absolutely done with roommates. That's the good news. No more living under somebody else's roof and sharing rent and just ending up in terrible, terrible scrambles where I'm forced to run off to some other place where I'm living under somebody else's roof. So, not doing that anymore. If you look around, I'm actually, well, for a lack of a better term, let's just say right now I'm in a hotel. Let's just call it that. Let's call it a hotel. That's kind of what this is. Um, yeah. So, in my comfy solitude, um, during this transitional time, I've had time to kill, and I've had my smartphone, and I've decided to visit Prime Video. And while I was visiting Prime Video, I saw that a shitload of Gamera movies were going to be taken off of Prime. They're going to be taken off, I guess a licensing thing fell through or something. I think Prime Video has every Gamera movie ever made. I think so. And they're leaving the service. They're just not going to be there anymore. And this happens to me whenever a streaming service does this. Whenever they tag something as not going to be there very much longer, or like, oh, you've got 7 days to watch this, then it's going to leave, or whatever. Every time that happens, it makes me want to watch those things. Like, it might be something I've ignored or didn't even know was on the service, and all of a sudden it'll pop up and it'll be like, this is leaving soon. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should try it then. So, anyway, Gamera is a giant fire breathing turtle. Now, if you've never heard of Gamera, basically the Gamera franchise, these are movies that came out in the wake of Godzilla's popularity. It's another Japanese kaiju franchise, rubber suit, giant monster movies, classic Japanese kaiju movies. Gamera was basically this other studio's answer to what Toho was doing with Godzilla. I think it's called Daiei Studio. I forget how to pronounce their name, but anyway, they made their own even lower budget, uh, like Me Too franchise that was supposed to capitalize sort of on what Godzilla was, but instead of a giant radioactive lizard, they had a giant fire-breathing turtle who can spin around and fly. Um, and I decided, you know what? I've never seen these freaking camera movies, which is funny because I do love kaiju movies. I mean, I love the classic. I like monster movies in general. I mean, freaking 1930s King Kong is, I love that. But classic Japanese kaiju movies with the rubber suits and the model cities that get destroyed and the little toy tanks and everything. I fucking love those movies. I mean, I grew up with classic Godzilla movies and shit. It's part of my childhood. So, like, it is funny that I've never seen any of these Gamera movies. I've always heard of Gamera. I knew what it was. It's pretty popular in Japanese popular culture, this giant turtle, because it does have a lot in common with Godzilla. It's just another cool kaiju monster. But I just, even though I knew kind of what it was, I've never seen a single one of those movies. So I finally decided to try the Gamera movies. I started with the very first one that was in black and white, Gamera the Giant Monster. It's literally, I think that's all it's called. And it's black and white. I think it was early 60s. And what I learned right off the bat is that Gamera is for kids. Gamera, unlike Godzilla, which would eventually, for a short time, the Godzilla movies would turn into kids' movies. They would eventually cater to young Japanese boys instead of the general audience, like the very first Godzilla movies were. And then eventually it would become serious again, but in the 80s or whatever. But like, there was a period where that happened to Godzilla as well. Gamera was like that from the start, though. Gamera has one formula for the longest time where each of the classic films from the 60s going into the 70s, all these Gamera movies were basically aimed at young Japanese boys, mostly. And it always has the plot always involves a young boy befriending Gamera. And then Gamera protects the boy and fights other monsters. And that's literally, I've seen a handful of them just trying to sample it, trying to get like a little bit of an idea of what these movies were or whatever. Yeah, trying to like learn the history of these Gamera movies to kind of get into the franchise or whatever. And they all follow that formula. They're all just giant turtle protects young boy who loves turtles. you know, and they're very cheap, even by like classic kaiju monster standards, which were known to be lower budget movies. But like, um, this was like really the old Gamera movies. Like they're really cheapo, and I just think compared to the best Godzilla movies, they're just not that good. They're just not that much fun to watch, especially as an adult. Like, who's seen better kaiju movies and better monster movies? Like, I guess you could say the best thing I could say about them is they're kind of cute. I mean, they're charming enough, but I mostly just wanted to fall asleep through a lot of them, and yeah. So eventually I convinced myself, okay, these older Gamera movies are just kind of one note. They're all doing the same thing. So then I heard the reputation of the 90's Gamera Trilogy. The Gamera movies that came out in the late 90's, starting with Gamera Guardian of the Universe. It was sort of a reboot of the franchise that actually did take it in a darker, more suspenseful tone, more in line with, you know, the best known Godzilla movies. So I finally decided to move on to those. I skipped ahead, jumped a few decades over, and I started that trilogy, and I watched all three of them in succession, which I didn't expect to do, but they were that good. They were really, really good. They definitely lived up to their reputation. I could see why people like these movies, because they're basically just really, really good kaiju movies that, quite frankly, more than any, like, I guess you could say this about a lot of tokusatsu movies in general, but more so than any other rubber suit like kaiju movies I've ever seen, these just straight up felt like anime. Like they really, the Gamera trilogy really just feels like the way they're directed, the way they're edited, the way they're paced, and the way they move and feel. It just straight up feels like I'm watching an anime trilogy or something. Like they just, these movies are freaking snappy, man. They move, and I like. There's a lot of kaiju movies, even some Godzilla movies that I like. Some of them are just paced a bit too slow sometimes. You know, they can drag. It's a common problem that a lot of just giant monster movies have. Even some of the American Godzilla movies, like 2014 uh, Godzilla, especially had this problem where like sometimes the human drama stuff just falls so flat, and there's way too much of that and not enough monster shit. And let me just say that this 90's Gamera trilogy, uh, they are by far the best paced kaiju movies, especially like rubber suit kaiju movies I've ever seen. Just plain and simple. There's always all the like exposition scenes or scenes with human characters are extremely brief, snappy. They get exactly the right amount of information. They get you just invested enough in the characters without wasting your time, without making it drag. And then you get another cool scene with a monster, whether it's Gamera doing something cool, or the enemy monster he's gonna fight doing something cool, or like they're just really well paced, structured movies. I was just never bored watching this trilogy. I was never looking at the time or whatever because I'm like, these two are fucking good movies, man. And it's also worth pointing out that, like, again, stylistically, they reminded me of anime, but like, it also, the monsters, the enemy monsters in each movie are so freaking cool. Like, In the first movie, you have these bird bat-like looking things, the Gyaos, which is actually a famous monster dating back to some of the older Gamera movies. But here they're given a lot more justice. They're actually like genuinely creepy looking and dangerous looking. And it's like this weird bird looking thing with like bat wings, kind of like a pterodactyl, but it also has like this razor blade head. It's really cool looking design. And that's the main monster of the first movie. That thing's really cool. And then in the second movie, you get these bug like insect creatures called Legion. And they end up forming into this big, scary insect by the end. And there's lots of like cool, like Mothra cocoon like shit going on. That's also cool with these creatures. And well, one of the things I really liked about these movies, especially, is that it does one of those things that kaiju movies do that I like, where the enemy monster has multiple forms, or it has to evolve or grow over the course of the movie before it can become its ultimate like threat by the end. Before Gamera has to really take it on, and I think that's good too because it allows the movie to have different levels of suspense and escalation. There's a nice build-up, you know, and all three movies do that. All three movies have an enemy monster that evolves or changes forms, or it starts as multiple monsters and they end up like fusing or devouring each other, and you have one that gets bigger, and it's like there's lots of that. You know, all three movies have a monster that does that in some way, in some form. And that's another thing I really liked. That's a trope that I really like. And like it just there's one particular scene in the second movie involving a subway where the insect monsters Legion, like you get an almost horror movie vibe where like before we get to the big kaiju stuff, like they start as these small creepy beetle insect creatures, and there's almost like a horror element at the start of that one. So like there's stuff like that, you know, before it turns into full-on kaiju city destroying stuff. And Gamera looks cool in all three of them. Like he was already a cool idea for a monster in the older movies, this big fire breathing, you know, he looks like a giant snapping turtle with like big teeth and everything. He's a cool looking monster. The design was always cool, the idea was always cool, but I think in this trilogy, because they obviously have a bigger budget and they're being more ambitious, he looks really cool in these movies. He looks hulking, he looks big and imposing, but much like the best Godzilla movies, or the best Godzilla designs, I should say, he has a hint of personality and expression. So he just looks really cool, and I like the effects in these movies in general. Like all the monsters look really good. I would say by the third movie is when it gets the best as far as effects go. They work in some computer effects that look really good. I mean, it's still mostly rubber suit shit, which I always appreciate. It still looks very practical. But there's even some CGI and computer stuff, especially by the third movie, that looks pretty damn good, especially for 90s films. And so, like, you get a sense that these movies were made with a pretty good budget. There's lots of destruction, lots of buildings collapsing and shit, but, like, it looks really good. Especially for, like, these rubber suit kaiju movies. Like, I would say it's on par with the best looking Godzilla movies of that era, because the 90s also had some really good looking Godzilla movies as well. But yeah, this Gamera trilogy has all that. And there's this young teenage girl in all three movies who has like a psychic connection with Gamera named Asagi. And she's actually, the actress who plays her is actually played by Steven Seagal's daughter, which was kind of crazy to learn. She doesn't do karate or anything in this movie, if you're wondering. She doesn't bust out moves or whatever, but I just thought that was funny. She's the daughter of Steven Seagal, and she gets to be a psychic companion with Gamera through all three movies. So they kind of still work in the idea of like a child befriending Gamera in a sense, but here it's treated more like this sacred bond. She has like a psychic connection with him. She's like a priestess, that you could say, um, that like can read Gamera's mind and everything, and it's handled, pretty well. It feels, again, feels very anime. It feels very anime. It's very cool. And by the third movie, you even get this other girl, whose parents were killed by Gamera accidentally because of all this stomping around and destruction that he causes when fighting other monsters. And she ends up wanting revenge without spoiling too much. And she ends up forming her own psychic connection with another monster in that movie. And then it gets really kind of interesting. So even like the human side of these movies is like surprisingly compelling, even though it's still pretty light. Like, these are still monster movies at the end of the day. They don't waste your time with like a ton of human drama or anything. It's not Godzilla -1, let's put it that way. You're not getting like hefty human drama here. It's not on that level. These aren't message movies necessarily. There is some stuff worked in there, some environmentalism in the first movie, tiny bit of that. Like, and by the third movie, I do like how they try to kind of add some moral angles of like, well, Gamera may be protecting the Earth by fighting these other monsters, but he's also causing plenty of destruction of his own. So it even kind of has that angle of like the problem of these kaiju movies where like, if this monster is the defender, you know, does he still count as a hero if he's stomping on people along the way and destroying stuff as well? And like, every time this thing is breathing fire or throwing monster into a building, like, people are dying. So like, the third movie even kind of addresses that a little bit. It kind of tackles it a little bit. I mean, it doesn't go very far with it, and it doesn't have like a definitive answer by the end of like, you know, should Gamera be allowed to like, you know, fight on humanity's behalf if cities are still being destroyed in the wake of it. You know, it's still a kaiju movie. Like, I don't know how you would fully answer that without Gamera still being kind of the hero, but at the same time, these monsters are treated like a force of nature. And I guess the idea is like, yeah, much like Godzilla, Gamera is this force of nature. He's just this powerful guardian, and you just got to get the hell out of the way when shit goes down. You know, like, but the idea is that he is on humanity's side, even though he is a force of destruction as well. Like, I like the idea that by the third movie, it even tries to work in some like some moral complications into the mix, where this other girl forms her own psychic connection with the enemy monster, and it's like, it gets interesting. It gets interesting. Um, so yeah, you have the first movie, Gamera, Guardian of the Universe. You have Gamera, Attack of Legion, and then finally, in 1999, you have Gamera, Revenge of Iris. And so you got this trilogy. They all came out relatively close. It's like from 95 to 99. The third movie even has like a Dreamcast cameo for some reason. I guess just because it launched in 99. I was kind of happy to see that. That was fun. There's literally a Dreamcast on screen at one point. I won't go into why, but it is there. So yeah, there were lots of awesome things in the 90s, and this Gamera trilogy is just one of those things. It was really freaking cool. I was happy to discover them before they left Prime Video. I guess unless you watch them immediately after watching this video, I don't know where else they're streaming or where you're going to find them. You might have to just order them on Blu-ray. And honestly, with how good this trilogy was, with how much fun I had watching it, I could see myself picking it up physically in the future. These are great movies. And unless you absolutely hate rubber suit kaiju movies, and you can't stand watching them even when they're at their best, I don't think this movie's going to make you a fan, because it does all the things that you would ever expect those movies to do. It has all the tropes. It just does them better than I've normally seen them done. Like I said, the effects are awesome. The monster designs are awesome. It feels like it takes rubber suit era kaiju stuff as far as it can possibly go, or has ever gone, Like, it might be the pinnacle of that. So I could see why these movies have that reputation. So if you like this genre, if you like these style of movies, this particular kind of lost style of kaiju giant monster movies, the Gamera Trilogy might be some of the best shit ever. Like, you just gotta see these movies. You know, they're, for all intents and purposes, they're still just Godzilla movies at the end of the day. It's just a giant fire breathing turtle instead of a giant lizard. It's the same shit. So like, if you like those, you're gonna love this, and you should watch it. Um, that's my take on the Gamera trilogy. So go watch them before Prime takes them away forever. Until next time, like, subscribe if you enjoy this video. And let me know in the comments below if you've ever seen any Gamera movies. If you've seen these Gamera movies, what do you think of them? And until next time, you get to burning and live for the passion.